Hello, this is a video guide about slicing. First, I'll show you how to export STL files from Fusion 360. When you're in Fusion, look over at the browser and expand the body folder. You may have more than one body, you'll need to do them one at a time. You'll find that there is a solid here. Right-click on it and go down to Save as Mesh. When you save as mesh, you'll have a couple different options for file type. Here we're going to use binary ASCII. One important thing to note is the units. This file was designed with inches, but most 3D printers use millimeters. So we're going to change that here. There are some other options you could select, but we can just leave the defaults and push OK. This dialog box allows you to rename the file. I strongly encourage that you use version numbers with your STL files because small changes in the part will actually be different files. Now we select the location. Here I'm just putting in the downloads and I'll save. Next we'll talk about exporting STL files from Onshape. Look over at the Parts section on the left side of the screen. Once again, right-click on this. There may be more than one part. You'll have to do them one at a time. And select Export. Here you'll want to rename the file, once again, using version numbers. The format and units are already set here, so I don't need to go over those again. Those are going to be the same STL in millimeters, and then hit Export. Next, we'll talk about exporting STL files from Tinkercad. Up at the top right of the screen, you'll see there's an option to export. Click that, and you'll have different file types. In this case, we want an STL. Now, there were not options for units, nor are there options for renaming the file. So keep in mind that you'll want to think about what the units were designed with, as well as versioning. Next, let's look at the 3D printer setup in Cura. The first thing you'll want to do when you open Cura is add a printer. You could have an Ultimaker printer or a non-Ultimaker printer. In this case, we're going to do a non-Ultimaker. Now, I don't have any networked printers, so I'm going to add one that I will use either via USB or just via an SD card. There are many printers from many manufacturers listed here. It's unlikely you'll have a printer that's not listed. In this case, we're going to look at a Creality 3D printer. That's the manufacturer. They're sorted first by manufacturer and then by model. This is an Ender 3 Pro. Now, since this is the second one, I'm just going to put a 2 at the end, but you could call it whatever you want. Once you click Add, you're taken to this screen. The defaults are pre-populated, but I have had some success in modifying some of these things. You just want to make sure that you know what you're doing before you go poking around. There's a second option for the extruder 1. Your printer might have multiple extruders. In this case, this printer only has one. We'll just hit Next. After you've got your printer set up, make sure that your material and your filament diameter are correct. We're going to use a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. And then, once again, these are arranged by manufacturer, but there's a generic category that we can just select generic PLA. This screen is showing a visual representation of the build plate. It says Ender right here in the middle, and that grid is showing you a valid print area. Anything in this area can be printed. Once the printer and the material are set up, we're ready to go. Now let's add files. We can look at scaling and moving as well. To add a file, click this Open Folder icon and pick the STL file that you created earlier. You can add more than one file at a time. I'm going to do this here to kind of show you what happens. You can zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. By holding the scroll wheel and dragging the mouse, you can pan. And by holding the right button and dragging the mouse, you can orbit. Now notice when I select an object, it highlights in blue, and you can also click and drag them. If you have an invalid part, like this one, it's off the build plate, it'll highlight with these yellow and black lines. You can also scale objects by selecting the scale option and making the object larger or smaller. Once again, it will highlight with those yellow and black lines if there's invalid geometry. If you don't like something, you can just select it and push delete and it will disappear. You can see here I accidentally scaled this, so I can just hit the reset button to undo that. Now I'm going to move my part to the center of the screen, and let's go ahead and take a look, and let's try slicing. So push the slice button down here. This is going to take about 34 minutes. And the reason for that is because I've got it standing vertically. The taller the part is, the longer it's going to take. Select the part, then select the rotate, then select lay flat, and pick the face you want to lay flat in the build plate. Now we've decreased the build time to 16 minutes, and all we've done is rotate the part. Usually the height of the part has a big effect on how long it takes. Now let's look at how to preview the results and create G-code. First, you can see there's this preview button. If you click it, you'll notice that different colors appear. Let's zoom in a little bit. These colors and lines represent different layers. You can use these sliders over at the right to scroll through the layers as they would be printed. The color scheme is shown here. Helpers are the cyan color, the outer shell is red, the infill is orange, and the inner wall is green. And if we scroll through, you can see the lines as they would be built up. Now this only has 2 layers, and that may be a bit thin. So let's adjust some of these things. If we click this drop down here, and we select Show Custom, we can look at the walls. There are only 2 wall layers, so let's increase that to 4. Now there's tooltips for pretty much everything. Notice it says you need to slice first before you continue. So let's push slice. And now you can see we've got much thicker walls. There are 4 layers now, a red outer and 3 green inners, but it's up to 19 minutes. That may be thicker than we need. So let's make some more adjustments. We'll change this to 3 layers instead, and increase the infill instead. The infill density will change from 0 to 100, how much material is printed inside the part. Now once again, you can see we're at a higher time, but we're going to end up with a stronger part. Let's go ahead and save this to the disk. Now notice when we save, we need to make sure we're being careful about our versioning. I already have a V1 G-code, so I'm going to need to manually increase this to V2 so I don't overwrite the first file, which only had which only had 2 layers. This first part in the file name is the type of printer, the second part is my file, and then finally I've added the V. And that's it. Now we've got G-code we can save and put on a USB drive and send to the printer.